Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He is tramping out the vintage where the grapes of wrath are stored. He hath loosed the fateful lightning of his terrible sword. His truth is marching on.
Good evening. My name is Hal Shurtleff, and I'm your host for the Americanist Perspective. We have a very interesting guest, and we'll be discussing the topic of censorship. Before I do, I want to mention that my guest, who has been a guest on the show a number of times, will be speaking at the Framingham Civic League, 214 Concord Street, at 7 p.m., free admission. And his topic is going to be the topic of his forthcoming book, or upcoming book, which will be called Culture versus Anti-Culture. And Professor Eugene Narrett recently spoke on behalf of the John Birch Society at its function in Reading, and it was some of the most powerful speaking I've heard in quite a long time. And I wish my pastor would preach as vehemently on certain issues as Professor Narrett. So I want to introduce my guest. He is a professor of English at Framingham State College and a columnist for the Middlesex News. Great to have you on again, Professor.
Nice to be with you, Hal.
Censorship is a topic that usually the average person thinks of censorship. They might think of parents denouncing the Catcher in the Rye, the local school, or some religious fanatics, so-called, that don't like certain magazines and libraries. But I think it goes much further than that, and there's all types of signs of censorship. I recently debated a number of people on a cable station in Somerville, Massachusetts, on censorship. And I said what some people call censorship, others call good taste or accurate information. And of course, as a spokesman for the John Birch Society and one who's responsible for putting programs on, I have to make sure what's on there is tasteful, accurate, and informative. So I, in some cases, censor myself. I don't want to put anything on there. What I call good taste or standards, others call censorship. I know when I'm posting flyers for speeches that they sometimes don't stay up too long. Or if I were to go up to Harvard Square or Cambridge and put out my little "Get Us Out of the UN" placards, that you could probably stand across the street and wait 5 minutes and see them torn down. So censorship is just, it is a two-way street. And The Catcher in the Rye may have been a legitimate book not to have in some schools if the parents are paying for it, but what about the Bible? What about history, the old history books that talked about God and government? Those have all been censored. So you have a unique perspective as a professor in a university or in a college, and also one who writes for a daily newspaper. So maybe you can relate some of your experiences, personal experiences with censorship.
I'm happy to do that, Hal. Disguising a little bit to protect the guilty so they don't wind up afflicting the innocent.
Maybe they can kind of a little, what they do, that little phasey look instead of...
something like that,
yeah.
Keep them from inflicting double jeopardy.
Disguise your voice.
But a lot of, you're very right that a lot of what is censorship in fact, if not in name, operates through the academy, through curriculum selection. And we've seen in the last 3 years, during the Clinton incumbency, a major example, a case in point, were those new standards for teaching American history and the standards for teaching world history, which were generated out of Berkeley, not Berkeley, out of UCal Los Angeles, or one of their campuses in Southern California, with a $2 or $3 million federal grant, and which presented a series of guidelines for teachers, which were sent to teachers around the country, which created a grotesquely distorted left-wing, hostile left-wing view of what America has been and what Western civilization and Judeo-Christian heritage has been in the world. So one way that censorship works is simply by the kind of curricular changes in schools that have come into place over the last generation, and that create a kind of judgment against, before the students ever even get into the class, judgment against their becoming familiar with or proud of their heritage. And then, of course, the more familiar kind of censorship occurs if you criticize that openly and try to present the traditional alternative. Then we get into another level.
I know there's a columnist for the Boston Globe, Jeff Jacoby, who is the token conservative, and I understand he's treated like a pariah or non-person there with his progressive free tolerant colleagues. And that is some type of a social censorship, perhaps. And I'm sure that there are some columns that the Globe does not print that he would like to have run, or maybe change the tone because it's kind of too controversial, or it's not politically correct enough, or such. Have you ever experienced that, or have you known anybody who experienced that?
Yes, I know people who experience that, including nationally syndicated columnists, and I have certainly experienced it myself. Before I give some specific examples, I will say that an even more insidious kind of censorship is the self-censorship, which is the result of this other kind, when you start censoring what you write or what you even think about writing about because you know you're going to get a lot of personal attacks, pressure from your editors. You know, you're becoming very difficult for us. You're a problem for us. We're tired of defending you against other readers. We're getting cancellation letters. You know, who knows if they are or not. You know, after you hear that a number of times.
Or advertisers are pulling out and such.
It's a threat. And so you censor yourself. But yes, I know of people, including nationally syndicated people, who censor themselves because they have been censored, particularly on issues like abortion, the whole area of life-related issues, and the homosexual agenda is a highly touchy one to write critically about. That's certainly my experience.